Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress. This is the monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bay 12 forums. Before we dive into the Q&A, if you would like to take part in these discussions, there is a link to the thread in the description of this video. And without further ado, let's dive into the monthly Bay 12 Games report. Toady writes, the Siege update is coming on November 3rd. I imagine we'll be tweaking it for a bit post-release, and then off to the next stuff. There are a number of Siege update items to finish, and whatever magic backing we need to make those happen, etc. There were 6,000 copies sold in October. The autumn sale is finished up, and then it was just the background sales level. So, still happy and healthy over here. Thank you very much, Tarn. And with all of that aside, we now dive into the Future of the Fortress questions. The first one comes in from the Marmot, and they write, are there any particular city planning problems that you would like to expand on? Diseases due to lack of hygiene, as an example, or seasonal floodings from rivers near the fortress, etc. I'm aware that the older versions of the game had an underground river that created seasonal floods, and players used the mud to grow crops. And Tarn's response is, it would be cool to get back to floods, but 3D made it much trickier, cave-ins as well, and it's the same problem. But it's all doable, and that would be good. I think disease and hygiene for dwarves in particular feels less dwarfy, perhaps, but the humans should suffer. I think child adoption, etc. problem is still pretty important, and education as well, like the guild apprenticeships, etc. Another question from the Marmot, and they say, will natural disasters make their way into the game at any time? I've only seen a few people talking about it recently, aside from epidemics on your interview with some poser named Blind IRL. And Tarn's response is, no idea when. It's good if they are a fun challenge. Earthquakes seem scary, floods and eruptions are scary, tornadoes and hurricanes are probably not as scary for dwarves, unless there's some associated flooding. Meteor strikes would be funny, but just bad luck. And yet another question from the Marmot, who's rapidly becoming the first of many main characters of this episode. Once some sort of flood preservation and nutrition update rework is on the tracks, will these mechanics be available to adventurers on release? And Tarn's response is, any nutrition changes would be in adventure mode automatically. Specific jobs are not as clear since we haven't moved Fort Industry over to adventure mode, though that's one of the dev nearer term goals with the cabin stuff. The Marmot then has another question. Any chances we'll get different types of armors? And while I would read these, I don't know how to pronounce any of them, so I will just read Tarn's response. Toady writes, armor and weapons have been really lackluster, using the cheap, early RPG types more or less. It would be cool to diversify, but no idea when that happened. Next up, we have a long one from my favorite username, Stained Class, and they say, the beatings are currently much deadlier than they should be. Will the beatings be changed for guards to hold their punches and not kill the criminal? On the other end, is there a reason why dwarves use hammers for executions and not other means like beheading with an axe? Was a hammering dwarfier? May the player killing a criminal sentenced to death with other creative ways eventually be counted as an execution and give happy thoughts to the injured parties? And Tarn's response is, if beatings are deadlier than they should be, it'd be due to unarmed combat being too deadly, probably, which is a bit of a can of worms. Being sentenced to the hammerer is a holdover from the original Dragslayer RPG we made. The humans had the lasher and the elves beat you with a cane. We've since reinterpreted the hammering as being reforged in the stories. I don't know that creative executions would give happy thoughts to the dwarves generally, since they don't delight in the torture in the same way humans can. Next up is a question from Catman3, and they say, with the Siege update updating sprites to the units like trolls, are there any plans of doing some on the wider scale for the update? Things like armor, weapons, clothing, etc. being visible on the intelligent wilderness creatures and semi-megabeasts. Going a bit further, what are the plans, if any, for the near future regarding the physical appearance traits of various units showing through in the graphics? For example, currently every giant looks like the same naked bald dude rather than reflecting their descriptions, or every King Cobra Man being depicted as a white scales as opposed to the various colors they might actually have. And they continue. War animals suffer a lot from the game not making it clear just how large they currently are. This can be an issue, as knowing how large a war animal is could be important in regards to scaling, how combat ready the animal is, or how dangerous the animals brought by invaders are during the siege. Obviously, a 1-year-old war dog isn't going to be fully grown yet, and as effective in battle. However, on the far more opposite side of the spectrum, we have dragons and cave dragons, which are born just a tad bit larger than a cat before slowly and gradually growing over tens to hundreds of years until they reach their terrifying colossal max sizes. Also, kind of important to know that the giant elephant the invading elves brought is about twice the size of a fully grown dragon. Bit of a long shot, but will some sort of answer to these issues come up with the Siege update? And Tarn's response is, we've already drawn a lot of the necessary sprites for this, but there are some implementation issues because there are just so many animal people. We'll get there, and other variations depend on doing the artwork. We're happy the more things are represented graphically, and we always have some things in the pipeline. The Siege update doesn't update creature descriptions as you suspected, but it would be good to have more information displayed. It's something of a tricky problem since there isn't a clear sense of height versus width, and all that. So we can't easily just show numbers, and all of the ways of doing relative to other things are also tricky since you run out of words and comparison points to be nice and concise about it. A question from Menandoril, I think that's how you say that? I could be wrong. Probably wrong. Correct me in the comments. Go nuts. Currently, all natural stone floors are gray. Will they eventually have their appropriate colors? On smaller worlds especially, a Forgotten Beast Thunderdome tends to lead to their eventual extinction, deep within the sealed-away caverns. With the Siege update, do you have any plans to change how Forgotten Beasts work at all? They've survived since time immemorial. Perhaps it should be quite rare for a Forgotten Beast to challenge another who is already on your map. And Tarn's response is, we were worried about it being gaudy and unreadable, but we've thought about doing muted variations from time to time. And Forgotten Beasts aren't changing with the release on November 3rd. But we are still due to change how the Mega Beasts work, and it might relate. The Thunderdome is kind of fun, but the extinction event isn't connaissant with the World Gen. A question comes in from PT Kato. Regarding the upcoming Siege update, will there ever be a situation where the enemies recognize that your defenses are too great and don't raid or besiege you at all? Or will they always go for it and try to overpower you by infinitely escalating? And Tarn's response is, if you are somehow surrounded by magma and water, balanced on a pillar from the underworld, they wouldn't be able to find a way in. I'm sure there are various other ways to cheese it, as well, that we haven't caught. But in terms of pure death value, they keep trying until they are spent. The future diplomacy, etc. changes may see some additional reason injected into the situation. And a question from Immortal D, and they say, can you estimate if the return of Cavern invaders will be close-ish behind the Siege update? Will Cavern invaders also have demolition and builder units and equipment? Same for elves and humans and necro armies. And Tarn's response is, we wanted to have them return in some form as part of the Siege stuff. Failing that, the underground map rewrite is a sure thing for them, since they are center stage. They'll surely have more than just the previous blowguns. They've had access to various beasts. If their flyers are insufficient, they'll need builders and/or climbers as well. Humans have access to pack animals that can carry material for building, and they rarely have access to large animal people that can also carry material for building. But elves still focus on ambushing rather than siegecraft. Humans have rams for demolition, though those are only effective to get to wagon-accessible depots because they are big. So they might need something else. A follow-up question from Immortal D, and they say, can units and equipment be added to modded civs, or perhaps applied automatically to any unit flagged as an invader? Have you ever considered giving food a shelf life? My roasts lasting a decade feels a bit silly. And Tarn's response is, nothing is hard-coded as usual here, though we're still interpreting some of the invader roles through Sieger and Ambusher. The existence of the Siege Engineer as permitted job impacts the use of engineers and rams. And as far as meals go, they rot outside of stockpiles, but food preservation has been a low-hanging dev item for ages. I'm not sure when we'll get back there. It would certainly add a bit to sieges. And a question from Le French Dwarf, and they say, hello. I'm not sure if I'm asking this in the right place or if the question has already been answered. I love Dwarf Fortress, both in Fortress mode and Adventure mode, but I was wondering if there are any plans to improve the positioning or behavior of the inhabitants of our fortresses. When we visit as an adventurer, they always seem to gather in a single room or wander around the hallways without any logic. From what I can tell, it's very different as an adventurer to move around your own fortress or look for a specific individual. For example, a blacksmith won't actually be near their forge. This is the main thing that breaks the immersion for me when I want to visit my fortresses. And Tarn's response is, we have a lot to do with the behavior of people in adventure mode in general. Everybody just sits someplace or goes on strolls in certain sites. We just haven't gotten back around to it since the magic food barrel days. And a question from Creparium, and they say, when we have proper economy in fortresses, will we be able to embrace communism by political or cultural decision, or just regulate monetary policies so that it looks so? And Tarn's response is, as the elements of the former entity rewrite come in, there will be a lot of control. Yeah, over laws and societal structure insofar as things can be accomplished, as well as the official will of the fortresses, or by placing of objects and making of spaces. I'm not sure if the more specific modern elements and terms of communism will be possible, since they are way post than 1400's cutoff, but taken in pieces, it still might be possible to approximate things that as we gain a better understanding of property and currency and labor in the game. And a question comes in from Amithaniu, and they say, regarding the new goblin, digging and building, and siege mechanic, are the goblin siege mechanics exclusive to player forts, or will we see naturally generated forts in human cities with the goblin dug tunnels and constructions? Also, what about the elves? And Tarn's response is, nothing new happens outside of your fortress. The release is focused on overcoming a loaded-in area, and invasions don't happen in loaded areas elsewhere, as an example, in adventure mode. And a question comes in from everybody's favorite Plump Helmet Man. And they say, hey Toady, the latest Siege release announcement is super exciting. On that note, I was wondering if we could get a clarification on what new mounts means in the context of the release. Does this mean the update is adding some all-new critters to the raws for goblins to domesticate, or just a wider variety of pre-existing critters can now serve as mounts for them? Exciting stuff either way. And Tarn's response is, there are no new critters, sadly, but the goblins now use a lot more of them than they used to. And a question comes in from Vanzetti, and they say, have you considered limiting the number or total mass of volume of objects that can be stored in a single tile? And Tarn's response is, we'd like to experiment with a pile tile, but of course that'd be a whole thing. I imagine the veteran quantum stockpilers would want to turn it off anyway. And a question from a name that I don't even know how to say, so I'll make something up. Thalasun. Do you plan to make races differ in their affinity for magic? Will there be characters who are naturally gifted or completely incapable of using it? Or will it work like the current skill system, where anyone can train any skill, except reading? Will the Siege update affect adventure mode as well? Maybe we'll get the ability to use catapults and ballista in the mode. And Tarn's response is, in the prototype, this was all proceduralized. I imagine that it'll still be the case, with some weights towards certain flavors depending on the nature of the creatures. And in regards to Siege, the Siege update doesn't relate to adventure mode. That was the former army arc, which is going to work into updates to come. The ability to use siege engines would only matter for those placed in fortresses currently, so there might be some fun with that. But it'd be very limited. You'd have to be able to place and build them in adventure mode for it to be useful. And a question from Lezinith Troglodyte, and they say, with the new invasions, will the undead get some buffs? Will zombies have pickaxes, and night creatures carry blocks? Additionally, are there some creatures, for example giant moles, that could be able to dig into your fortress for invaders? And Tarn's response is, undead without experiments don't get anything yet. I'd considered doing something with moles because, as you suggest, famous digging creatures, but I didn't get a chance to do pathing for trained digging creatures at all, versus regular miners with picks. Lots of improvements are yet to be done. A question from Jana Raven, and they say, what sort of variations are there for different race and civ sieges, either planned or already implemented? And Tarn's response is, goblins have their monsters, so they have reliable building destroyers, and monstrous siege engineers. They also have flying mounts, so all of their bases are covered, pretty much. Humans have regular engineers and rams and slower miners, so they do okay as well. Elves have their random set of mounts and creatures that are also ambush-oriented, so they'll probably feel the least changed from their original state. Aside from their flyers working somewhat better, dwarves have good miners but are otherwise, like humans, more or less, I think. Next up, we have a series of questions from Sooner535, and they say, I was thinking about the randomness of magic, and it gave me a thought that there could be a world created once everything is in line with magic that, let's say, has a spell that anyone can cast that just digs a tile almost instantly and uses mana, runes, or whatever feels like magic in the world. That was a long run-on sentence. Would that possibly cause the world to not need or even have picks? And I was thinking that could be a cool idea. And I'm not sure if things will go that far or how you want that type of thing to work. And Tarn's response is, yeah, this is the sort of thing that's in the realm of possibility, with teleport spells and everything else. It opens up the very big question of how the AI of all the units can use all of the abilities at their disposal, and we simply need to plug away at it. And another very long question that has a lot of run-on sentences from Sooner535. I was thinking about how we have our current nobles and how there ends up being quite a few. Is there a plan to offer, or maybe based on the traits of the host civ, some sort of council member, a council chamber for things like a dwarf civ that prefers colonies to be ran more democratically, at least more than having more than one person choose everything. I was thinking that in these forts you need a table and a chair for each member of the council, and they meet, and that's where the mandates and such come from. Could it also be interesting if you can influence it in some way, other than straight up selecting? But that could be interesting too. Who ends up on the council and how that affects your fort. So if you have a bunch of miners who love wheat on the council, you may see mandates and bans on things related to their wants and hates, and likes. Or is all of that a bit too not dwarf? And Tarn responds with, the former entity rewrite and starting scenarios arc was going to provide us with a lot of new societal structures, and forts would be in the center of this. This is still the plan, but it's not going to come all in one big push, most likely. So certainly you won't have to deal with nobles in every game. And another one from Sooner535. I have to say that the performance gains since I played, more than a decade ago now, are staggering. I played a fort in a 7x7 embark and hit around 300 dwarves and about 100 animals and was still cruising along just fine in terms of performance. I am wondering, what more plans are there in this regard? It's a huge and amazing step in the right direction so far, just wondering what the future holds. And Tarn's response is, Putnam has done excellent work here, and though it gets harder and harder, I'm sure that she'll find more things as she goes. And a question comes in from username 123, and they ask, what exactly are forces? Are they natural deities associated with nature, or some sort of forest hive mind thing? Spirits? And Tarn's response is, it's not defined. They don't have a clear personality and appearance as with the deities, but they might end up with some kind of personality or behavior as they are further defined and made procedural. I imagine it'll end up somewhat diverse, and some lines will blur. And as always, that brings us to the end of this month's Future of the Fortress. I do want to quickly apologize for failing to get an episode out last month, as I was very, very burnt out and busy, and also spending a lot of time streaming. And by the time I realized that I hadn't uploaded the episode yet, it was too late in the month to really have much use. So I figured I would just get ahead of things and get this episode out as quickly as possible. I also have another video that I'm slowly working on in the background, which is a highlight of the sieges I've seen so far, so keep an eye out for that in the next week or so. I do want to ask everybody who's watching this video if you have messed around with the siege update. What do you think of it so far? There's definitely been an influx of new players picking the game up recently, due to the current sale as well as the update. I'd love to know what your guys' impressions are. For me, it's mostly just the rams need a little bit of tweaking and balancing. And I also noticed that they can't deconstruct walls from below. Aside from that, it's been quite a bit of fun for me, and I hope that you've had a similar experience. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.